I stared at my reflection in the mirror, practicing the fake smile I had perfected over the years. My heart sank as Melanie's cruel words replayed in my mind. Just to be clear, you are nor never will be a part of this family. So don't expect to be at my wedding. Her icy tone cut through me like a knife, reopening old wounds I thought had long healed. I had sacrificed so much for Doug and his daughter, enduring years of hostility and rejection from Melanie, all in the hopes of one day being accepted as part of their family. It was a harsh reminder of how far I had come, from a driven career woman who once prioritized success over personal relationships to a devoted wife and stepmother. Meeting Doug at that corporate event years ago had been a whirlwind romance, and his warmth and earnestness had melted my icy exterior. Little did I know that marrying a single father would be the greatest challenge of my life. Melanie, then a precocious 10-year-old, had made it clear from the start that I was an unwelcome intruder in her world. My attempts at bonding were met with indifference or outright hostility. The forgotten lunchboxes, the skipped school events, and the blatant disrespect were all painful reminders that I would never truly be accepted as her mother. Doug tried his best to bridge the gap, but even he couldn't control Melanie's escalating defiance as she entered her teenage years. The lies, the stolen money, and the constant arguments strained our marriage to its limits. And now, as Melanie prepared to marry Trent, a wealthy architect from a prominent family, she had made it abundantly clear that I would never be a part of her life. Her hurtful words, "You're just an ATM and a maid, my real mom's family, not you," had shattered any remaining hope I harbored. But this time I wouldn't sit idly by and accept her cruelty. A plan was forming in my mind. A carefully orchestrated revenge that would expose Melanie's true colors and the deceit she had woven around her perfect life. As I looked into the mirror, I saw a steely determination in my eyes, a resolve born from years of hurt and rejection. This time I would be the one holding the cards, and Melanie would learn the hard way that actions have consequences. I couldn't help but smile as I reminisced about the day I first met Doug. It was at a corporate event, and I was immediately drawn to his warm, genuine demeanor. Little did I know that our chance encounter would lead to a whirlwind romance and a life-altering decision. Doug was a divorced father of one, and his 10-year-old daughter Melanie was his world. He spoke of her with such pride and adoration that I couldn't help but be charmed. When he asked me out for coffee, I agreed without hesitation, intrigued by this man who seemed to have his priorities in order. Over the next few months, our connection deepened, and I found myself falling for Doug's kindness and unwavering devotion to his daughter. He was a stark contrast to the ruthless corporate world I was accustomed to, and his gentle nature was a breath of fresh air. It wasn't long before Doug proposed, and I said yes without a second thought. I was ready to take on the role of a stepmother, confident that with time and effort, Melanie would come to accept me as part of her family. Little did I know that the road ahead would be paved with obstacles and heartbreak. From the moment I moved in, Melanie made it clear that I was an unwelcome intruder. Her icy glares and cold shoulders were a constant reminder that I was an outsider in her world. I tried everything I could to connect with her, from baking her favorite treats to attending her school events, but she remained distant and aloof. "Why don't you just leave us alone?" she would snap whenever I attempted to engage with her. "You'll never be my real mom." Doug tried to intervene, but Melanie's defiance only grew stronger as she entered her teenage years. She began skipping school, lying to us, and even stealing money from my purse. Each incident was like a dagger to my heart, and I couldn't help but question whether I had made the right decision in marrying into this family. "Please, Melanie, give Rita a chance," Doug would plead, his voice laced with desperation. "She loves you like her own." But Melanie was having none of it. "She's not my mother, and she never will be," she would snarl, her eyes filled with disdain. As the years passed, the rift between us only widened, and I found myself retreating into my work as a means of escape. I had sacrificed so much for this family, and yet I felt like a stranger in my own home. But now, with Melanie's wedding looming, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this would be the turning point, the moment when she would finally accept me as part of her life. Little did I know that her cruelty would reach new heights, shattering any remaining illusions I had about our relationship. As Melanie entered her teenage years, her defiance and hostility towards me reached new heights. I couldn't count the number of times I had come home to find her room in disarray, clothes strewn across the floor, and the lingering scent of smoke hanging in the air. "Melanie, we need to talk about this," I would say, my voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and concern. She would simply roll her eyes and brush me off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Mind your own business. You're not my mother." Those words, uttered with such venom, never failed to cut me deep. I had tried so hard to be a positive influence in her life, to be the supportive and nurturing figure she so desperately needed, but my efforts were met with nothing but contempt. Doug, bless his heart, did his best to mediate the situation, but even his pleas fell on deaf ears. "Melanie, please show some respect," he would say, his brow furrowed with worry. "Rita is trying her best." "Trying her best at what?" Melanie would snarl, her eyes narrowing with disdain. "Trying to replace my real mom? Well, newsflash, it's never going to happen." Her words stung like a slap to the face, and I couldn't help but feel like a failure. No matter how hard I tried, I could never seem to bridge the gap between us. Things only got worse as Melanie's rebellion escalated. She began skipping school, lying about her whereabouts, and even stealing money from my purse to fund her escapades. I would come home to find my carefully packed lunch for her untouched, the sandwiches growing stale and the fruit withering away. "Where have you been?" I would demand, my heart racing with fear and frustration. "None of your business," she would snap, brushing past me without a second glance. The final straw came at one of her high school events, where I had gone out of my way to attend, hoping to show my support and perhaps finally earn a modicum of respect from her. But as I approached her group of friends, smiling and waving, Melanie's reaction was nothing short of devastating. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing with disdain. "You're not my mother. Stop pretending you are." The words hung in the air like a thick, suffocating fog, and I could feel the eyes of her friends upon me, judging and pitying me in equal measure. In that moment, I had never felt more embarrassed, more humiliated, and more like an outsider in my own family. As I retreated, hot tears stinging my eyes, I couldn't help but wonder how much more of Melanie's cruelty I could endure. I had sacrificed so much for this family, for the dream of being accepted and loved, but it seemed like a lost cause. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come, and Melanie's vicious words on the eve of her wedding would be the final straw that unleashed a storm of revenge that had been brewing for years. When Melanie announced her engagement to Trent, a young, ambitious architect from a wealthy family, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this would be the turning point in our relationship, the moment when she would finally accept me as part of her life. But as I soon discovered, my optimism was misplaced. Trent was a charming young man, with a confident demeanor and a bright future ahead of him. As he and Melanie shared the details of their whirlwind romance, I couldn't help but be struck by the stark contrast between them. He was poised and articulate, while Melanie seemed almost childlike in his presence, her usual defiance replaced by a strange docility. "We're so excited to start this new chapter together," Trent gushed, his arm draped protectively around Melanie's shoulders. I forced a smile, pushing down the nagging doubts that had begun to surface. "Congratulations," I said, my voice strained. "I'm so happy for you both." Melanie barely acknowledged me, her eyes fixed on Trent with an almost worshipful gaze. It was as if I was invisible, a mere footnote in her life. As the wedding planning began, Melanie's true colors quickly resurfaced. She became increasingly dismissive and condescending towards me, treating me more like a servant than a member of the family. "Rita, can you make sure the caterers have everything they need?" she would bark, her tone laced with impatience. When I tried to offer suggestions or input, she would shut me down with a wave of her hand. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it," she would say, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Just leave the important decisions to the real family." And then, just days before the wedding, the final blow came. "Just to be clear," Melanie said, her words slicing through me like a knife, "you are nor never will be a part of this family, so don't expect to be at my wedding." The venom in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. After years of trying, of sacrificing, of enduring her cruelty in the hopes of one day being accepted, she had made it abundantly clear that I would never be anything more than an outsider. "You're just an ATM and a maid," she spat, her eyes narrowed with contempt. "My real mom's family, not you." In that moment, something shifted within me. The hurt and anger that had been simmering beneath the surface for years finally boiled over, and a newfound sense of determination took hold. I would no longer be the victim, the one who cowered and accepted her abuse. It was time for me to take control, to orchestrate a plan that would bring Melanie's carefully constructed world crashing down around her. As I watched her fawn over Trent and his wealthy family, a seed of an idea began to take root. If she wanted to treat me like an outsider, then I would make sure she got her wish, and so much more. The wheels were in motion, and Melanie's precious wedding day would be the stage for a revenge years in the making. With a newfound determination burning within me, I set my plan into motion. Melanie thought she could treat me like an outsider, like a mere servant in her grand scheme of things. Well, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I started by discreetly digging into her financial records, scouring through bank statements and credit card bills. It didn't take long to uncover a trail of deceit and mishandling that would make even the most seasoned con artist blush. Hidden bank accounts, credit cards maxed out on extravagant purchases, and a lifestyle far beyond what her meager income could support. It was all there, laid bare before my eyes. Melanie had been living a lie, and I had the evidence to prove it. At first, Doug was hesitant when I presented my findings to him. He had always been the peacekeeper, the one who tried to smooth over the tensions between Melanie and me. But as the depth of her deception became clear, even he couldn't deny the gravity of the situation. "This is serious, Rita," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "If what you're saying is true, she could be facing legal consequences." I nodded, my jaw set in determination. "Believe me, it's all true. And it's time she learns that actions have consequences." With Doug reluctantly on board, I began to meticulously plan my revenge. Every detail had to be perfect, every move calculated to ensure maximum impact on Melanie's precious wedding day. I reached out to my network of contacts, calling in favors and greasing palms to ensure that the right people would be in the right place at the right time. It was a delicate dance, a high-stakes game of chess where one wrong move could topple the entire house of cards. But I was determined, fueled by years of rejection and humiliation at the hands of Melanie. This was my moment, my chance to finally take control and show her just how far I was willing to go to protect myself and my family. As the wedding day drew closer, the tension in our household was palpable. Melanie strutted around like a queen, barking orders and treating us all like her personal servants. Doug tried his best to keep the peace, but even he couldn't hide the concern etched onto his face. "Are you sure about this, Rita?" he asked me one night, his voice hushed and tinged with worry. I gave him a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder, my confidence unwavering. "Trust me, Doug. It's time for Melanie to face the consequences of her actions." And as I finalized the last details of my plan, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation coursing through my veins. Melanie had no idea what was coming, no inkling of the storm that was about to descend upon her carefully curated world. The stage was set, and the curtain was about to rise on what promised to be the most dramatic and satisfying revenge I had ever orchestrated. The wedding day dawned bright and sunny, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to unfold. As Doug and I arrived at the lavish venue, I could feel the anticipation building in the pit of my stomach. This was it, the moment I had been carefully orchestrating for months. Melanie, resplendent in her white gown, was already ensconced in the bridal suite, surrounded by her attendants and a flurry of activity. She barely acknowledged our presence, too caught up in the whirlwind of her own self-importance. "Just make sure you stay out of the way," she snapped at me, her eyes narrowed with disdain. "This is my day, and I won't have you ruining it." I forced a smile, nodding obediently. "Of course, Melanie, whatever you say." As the guests began to arrive, the tension in the air was palpable. Trent's family, with their impeccable pedigree and designer outfits, mingled among the crowd, casting disapproving glances in our direction. Doug fidgeted nervously beside me, his fingers tapping against his leg in a restless rhythm. "Are you sure about this, Rita?" he whispered, his voice laced with concern. I gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, my resolve unwavering. "Trust me, Doug, it's time for the truth to come out." As the ceremony began, I couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration coursing through my veins. The first domino was about to fall, setting off a chain reaction that would shatter Melanie's carefully constructed facade. And then, just as the officiant was about to begin the vows, a commotion erupted at the back of the venue. All eyes turned to see a delivery man pushing his way through the crowd, a large envelope clutched in his hand. "Delivery for Mr. Trent Holloway," he announced, his voice echoing through the hushed silence. Trent's brow furrowed in confusion as he stepped forward to accept the package. "What is this?" he muttered, tearing open the envelope. That's when all hell broke loose. As Trent rifled through the contents of the envelope, his face contorted into a mask of shock and fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he bellowed, his voice trembling with rage. Melanie's eyes widened in panic as she rushed to his side. "Trent, what's going on?" But Trent wasn't listening. He held up the damning evidence, his eyes boring into Melanie's with a mixture of betrayal and disgust. "How could you, Melanie? All these lies, all this deception?" The guests erupted into a flurry of whispers and gasps, their perfectly coiffed heads swiveling between the two like spectators at a tennis match. Melanie's face drained of color, her lips trembling as she tried to formulate a response. "Trent, I can explain." But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. As Trent continued to confront Melanie, laying bare her web of lies and financial misdeeds, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction washing over me. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when Melanie's cruelty and deceit would finally come crashing down around her. "Trent, how could you do this now?" she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. But Trent was having none of it. "How could I?" he roared, his face twisted with fury. "How could you, Melanie? You've been lying to me, to all of us, from the very beginning." As the chaos unfolded, I caught Doug's eye from across the room. He gave me a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the justice that was being served. And in that moment, as Melanie's world crumbled before our very eyes, I knew that I had finally taken control. The years of rejection, the constant belittling, the feeling of being an outsider in my own family, it had all led to this moment of sweet, satisfying revenge. Melanie may have thought she could treat me like a servant, but in the end, it was I who had pulled the strings, orchestrating her downfall with precision and cunning. And as the repercussions of her actions began to rain down upon her, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, a validation that my sacrifices and pain had not been in vain. The curtain had fallen on Melanie's grand charade, and I was the one left standing, triumphant and unapologetic. As the chaos unfolded around us, it was as if time itself had ground to a halt. The lavish wedding venue, once a vision of elegance and grandeur, had been transformed into a battleground of betrayal and recrimination. Trent's face was contorted with fury, his fingers clenched tightly around the damning evidence of Melanie's deceit. "How could you do this to me, Melanie?" he roared, his voice reverberating through the hushed silence. "How could you lie and manipulate me like this?" Melanie, for once, was at a loss for words. Her carefully cultivated facade of poise and confidence had shattered, revealing the true colors of her selfish and manipulative nature. She opened and closed her mouth like a gasping fish, her eyes darting frantically around the room, seeking an escape from the harsh glare of judgment that surrounded her. "Trent, please?" She finally managed to choke out, her voice trembling with desperation. "It's not what it looks like. I can explain." But Trent wasn't having any of it. With a swift motion, he tore off the ring that had symbolized their ill-fated union, hurling it to the ground with a clatter. "There's nothing to explain, Melanie," he spat, his eyes narrowed with contempt. "You've been playing me for a fool from the very beginning, and I won't stand for it any longer." Around us, the guests erupted into a cacophony of whispers and gasps, their perfectly coiffed heads swiveling back and forth like spectators at a tennis match. Melanie's own family, the ones she had held in such high regard, recoiled in horror, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and disgust. And in the midst of it all, there was Doug, standing by my side, his hand clasped tightly in mine. "We're here just to see the truth come out," he murmured, his voice laced with a strange sense of resignation. Justice doesn't need an invitation. As the confrontation between Trent and Melanie escalated, the details of her deception spilled forth like a foul-smelling torrent. Hidden bank accounts, fraudulent loans, and a litany of lies that had formed the very foundation of her carefully constructed life. It was all laid bare for the world to see. Melanie's face contorted with rage, her eyes narrowing into slits as she turned her gaze towards me. "You," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "This was you, wasn't it? You're behind all of this." I met her accusation with a steady gaze, unflinching in the face of her fury. "I merely provided the truth, Melanie," I said, my voice calm and measured. "You're the one who chose to live a lie." With those words, it was as if a dam had burst within her. Melanie let loose a torrent of vitriol, hurling insults and threats in my direction with reckless abandon. But her words held no power over me anymore. I had finally broken free from the shackles of her cruelty, and I reveled in the sweet taste of vindication. As the chaos swirled around us, I caught sight of Trent's family huddled together, their faces etched with grim determination. It was clear that the legal repercussions of Melanie's actions were already taking shape, and the consequences she had so carelessly ignored were about to come crashing down upon her. And in that moment, as I watched the very foundation of her carefully curated world crumble before my eyes, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph wash over me. The years of rejection, the constant belittling, the feeling of being an outsider in my own family, it had all led to this moment of sweet, satisfying justice. Melanie may have thought she could treat me like a servant, but in the end it was I who had pulled the strings, orchestrating her downfall with precision and cunning. And as the repercussions of her actions began to rain down upon her, I knew that my sacrifices and pain had not been in vain. The curtain had fallen on Melanie's grand charade, and I was left standing tall, vindicated, and unapologetic. Justice, it seemed, had finally found its way home. In the aftermath of Melanie's grand unraveling, the world seemed to move in slow motion. The once pristine wedding venue lay in shambles, a crumpled reminder of the charade that had come undone with such spectacular force. As the dust settled, the true extent of Melanie's deception became painfully clear. Lawsuits from Trent's family rained down like a relentless storm, each one a damning indictment of her lies and financial misdeeds. Charges of fraud and embezzlement loomed large, casting a dark shadow over her once promising future. And through it all, Melanie remained defiant, lashing out at anyone who dared to cross her path. "You'll all pay for this," she snarled, her eyes wild with fury. "Nobody does this to me and gets away with it." But her threats rang hollow, mere echoes of the power she had once wielded with such impunity. The world had seen her for who she truly was, a manipulative, deceitful woman who had built her life on a foundation of lies. As the legal proceedings dragged on, Doug and I found ourselves caught in the eye of the storm. Lawyers and investigators swarmed around us, their questions probing and relentless. But through it all, we stood united, a bulwark against the chaos that threatened to engulf us. "We did the right thing," Doug would murmur, his hand clasped tightly in mine. "She brought this upon herself." And as the months wore on, the once indomitable Melanie began to crumble under the weight of her own actions. The family she had once held in such high esteem turned their backs on her, their disdain and disappointment a palpable force. Even her own mother, Nancy, couldn't bring herself to defend her daughter's actions. "I never thought she would stoop so low," she confessed to me one day, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Where did I go wrong? It was a question that haunted us all, a reminder that sometimes even the best of intentions can lead to the darkest of outcomes. But through it all, I found solace in the knowledge that justice had been served. Melanie's reign of terror had come to an end, and the scars she had inflicted upon our family were finally beginning to heal. As the chaos subsided and a new sense of normalcy began to take hold, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. The path had been long and arduous, paved with heartache and sacrifice, but in the end, it had all been worth it. And then, just when I thought the world couldn't possibly hold any more surprises, fate intervened with a gift more precious than I could have ever imagined. It was a crisp autumn morning when I felt the first flutters of life within me, a subtle reminder that even in the darkest of moments, hope can still take root. As the realization dawned upon me, tears of joy streamed down my face, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. When I shared the news with Doug, his eyes lit up with a joy I hadn't seen in years. "A new beginning," he whispered, pulling me close. "A chance to do things right." And as we stood there basking in the warmth of our newfound happiness, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. The past had been a tumultuous journey, but now, with the weight of Melanie's cruelty lifted from our shoulders, we were free to embrace the future with open arms. This time, I vowed, things would be different. Our family would be built on a foundation of love, respect, and understanding, a stark contrast to the pain and betrayal that had once threatened to tear us apart. As I cradled my growing belly, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of the little life growing within me. This child would know only love, only acceptance, and would never have to endure the heartache that had once been our constant companion. The storm had passed, and in its wake, a new dawn was breaking, one filled with hope, forgiveness, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.